Good afternoon. Welcome to our NC Career Connection speaker series. Today we'd like to welcome Ms. Recktenwald to our September 24th, 2020 I Work NC Virtual NC Career Connection speaker series. Ms. Recktenwald is a special assistant to the policy team for the NC Office of the Governor. So, Ms. Recktenwald, I'm going to stop sharing and let you do your presentation. Thank you for being here.
Okay, great, and thank you for having me. I love that picture is from when I was in high school, so I love to see that. All right, can you see my screen?
We can, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Bailey Recktenwald, and I work in the policy office for Governor Cooper, and today I'll be speaking about public policy and project management. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is going to be covered in this presentation. First and foremost, what is public policy? I get this question a lot from family and friends, so it's important that we clear that up. And then I'll talk about studying public policy and what that academic journey can look like. And then I'll shift into my job in the governor's office, along with policy making and project management as a whole. And then finally, I'll go into how to get the job and other careers in public policy that might look a little different from the job I do. So first and foremost, what is public policy? It's a very broad term, and it's really not a career that's talked about super often in school, but it's something that you see every single day. So we can all be really overwhelmed with the problems of the world, especially right now. We have a global pandemic, we have reckoning with racial justice issues, we have wildfires and severe storms happening all at once, and it can be really overwhelming for me, and I know for everyone else too. So public policy really asks, what are we going to do to fix these problems? And as I go through these focus areas, I want you to think about examples that you've seen in your own life. You should be familiar with all of these through what you've seen in the news and social media, and all of this is public policy work. So first, education policy. This affects you, obviously, as you're all in school. Education policy is everything from early childhood all the way K through 12 into higher education and universities and community colleges. And it's really about how we can make our education system better. Then we have climate change policy. This has become a pretty big field in the last few years, and it covers everything from renewable energies like solar and wind to communities on the coast who are experiencing sea level rise and how to help them, to greenhouse gas programs like cap and trade and carbon taxes. And then more broadly, we have environmental policy, which is everything from clean air and clean water to protecting our ecosystems and endangered species. And then we have criminal justice policy. This is also a pretty big area right now. That's everything from before an arrest even happens, what led someone to that arrest, to the arrest and legal court process through incarceration, and then what happens after someone who's incarcerated gets out of the justice system, which is known as reentry. Then we have healthcare, also a big topic that covers everything from how do you respond to a pandemic effectively to more focused issues like Medicaid and Medicare, addressing the opioid epidemic and things like that. So it's a huge umbrella and a really complicated but exciting field to be in. Then we have housing policies. So this is everything from being able to keep your home to homelessness issues. You can also think about some social services like food stamp programs and other social safety nets. And then we have foreign policy, which is something that the governor's office doesn't really deal with because it's a federal issue, but that's your international relations with other countries. And along that, we have military policy, military strategy, national security. It's a huge industry. There's even a major at UNC Chapel Hill called Peace, War, and Defense, where you can study this specifically. So that's a really big topic as well. And then finally, economic policy. That's everything from trade and tariffs and taxes to budgets and commerce. And then there are many, many other things that I didn't touch on, but hopefully this kind of gives you an understanding of what areas policy might touch in your everyday life and how it can affect the world. So you might be really interested or passionate about one of these things, and you could be wondering, how do I study it? What do I do? So first, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about me. So I was born and raised in Durham, North Carolina. I attended Riverside High School, and I went to Governor's School West for social sciences, which was a life-changing experience. I loved it. So from a really young age, I've always been passionate about climate change issues. I think when I was about 10, I learned that polar bears were dying, and I felt like I needed to do something about it. I didn't know what that was yet, but I wanted to study some climate science issues. So I decided to go to college for a degree in geography. Geography, as a little aside, it's a really cool degree. You can learn about things like atmospheric science and climate science, but you can also learn about map making and data visualization and human geography, which is like migration patterns and how people interact with each other. So it's a really, really cool degree, and I'll plug that real quick. But once I got there, I settled in and decided that policy was the route that I wanted to go. So I ended up majoring in public policy and geography, and graduated with degrees in those. And I also received a minor in social and economic justice. And I'll also do a little bit of a pause for the minor for kind of a pro tip for folks. I think that if you're thinking about doing a minor, that you should do something you're really passionate about and interested in. Your minor classes are usually only 5 classes, but it can be a nice break from those core classes, and you can do something that you're really interested in. So I've always been interested in social justice, and I always loved those classes in my minor, and it was really fun. So that would be my tip as far as when you're thinking about minors. And I graduated in the spring of 2019, and then I started my work in Governor Cooper's office as a special assistant to the policy team, which I'll get into a little bit later about exactly what that means. So let's talk about undergraduate majors. So there is a degree in public policy. I'll talk about in a second how many schools offer that degree, but I think it's a great degree to have. It's what I can speak to because that's what I have. But most people in my program would at least double major or minor in something else to really become an expert in that issue area they care about. So some examples of this would be public health, economics, environmental studies, international relations, or political science. That way you can really focus in whatever your minor or major area is, become that expert in the data and how that field works, and then use that in your policymaking lens for when you're making decisions about that field. And then you also have several master's programs and options. A lot of people in the policy space have law degrees. You don't have to have a law degree, but it's something that's pretty popular. There's also a master's in public administration, which is kind of like the MBA for the public sector, and kind of it teaches you how to be a leader in the public space. I'm probably going to look at receiving an MPA in the future personally. There's also a master's in public policy, which is more focused on that lens. And there's a master's in public health called an MPH, which a lot of people you see today on the news have MPHs, and it's a really popular graduate degree to receive as well. So in terms of what a public policy degree entails. It's incredibly interdisciplinary, which is one thing I really liked about it. So you have to take classes in economics. You need to understand supply and demand on a macro level, and also micro level economics. Those classes can be a little bit math heavy, but you can work through it. You also have to understand politics. Policymakers in general try to separate themselves from politics, but politics always come into play somehow. If a policymaker has this wonderful solution to a policy problem, they know this will work, they know it will solve all of the issues in the world, sometimes it's not politically feasible, and there could be other institutions in play that don't agree. So you have to understand how to compromise and work within the political system. Then we have philosophy, which might sound a little bit surprising, but philosophy is really important in making policy decisions because it shapes your ethics and morals and ideologies. So we want to make sure that our policies aren't doing more harm than good. You have to weigh these costs and benefits all the time. So you might have to take classes in philosophy. I personally love philosophy classes. Then we have statistics. In order to make changes that will affect a lot of people, you need to know that those actions will work. And so statistics and data can really back that up. So you'll have to take several statistics classes, most likely, which are fun for some and not so fun for most, but they're really important. For example, let's say you have a hypothesis that children with asthma, or there are households where people smoke, influences asthma rates in children, but you're not sure about that. And if you make a policy to reduce smoking rates in order to decrease asthma rates in children, but it doesn't work because that wasn't the cause in the first place, then you went all through all of this work for a policy solution that wasn't there. So you need to be able to prove that causality and prove that smoking is causing higher asthma rates in children. And so you do fancy things called multivariate regression models in order to address that. And so, yeah, you'll have to take some statistics classes. And then finally, research is obviously an important thing as well. You have to be able to do research projects and write research papers because you have to become an expert in the area to understand how to make those decisions. So I think that public policy is a great career path for people who are natural problem solvers. We oftentimes think of engineers and scientists and computer scientists in that problem solver space, which is great and they're really important, but you can be someone who's not as strong at math or science and still be a policymaker, and you're attacking problem solving all the time. There are always new challenges. The world will never be fixed, so there's always plenty to do. And then finally, as far as what can make someone a good policymaker, you got to be a strong writer. You have to have a good grasp of data so you know how to interpret that data, and you're actualizing big ideas. So an example that I would pull away from the big ideas thing is right now, obviously it's the middle of election season. You're seeing ads all the time for on your TVs and through social media for candidates who have big ideas and big solutions to things. Policymakers are the ones that are really actualizing those solutions. So they're putting the pen to the paper, figuring out whether that means budgets need to be moved around or sometimes maybe more boring things, but they're making those big ideas really happen. So for research for this presentation, I looked at public policy programs in North Carolina. I was a little disappointed to find there aren't a lot of options out there. UNC Chapel Hill, go Heels, Duke, UNC Charlotte, Elon, and Salem College, which is an all-women's school, are the only programs in the state I could find that offer public policy degrees. Of those, only UNC Charlotte and Chapel Hill are public institutions. But fear not if those colleges aren't the right fit for you. There are plenty of people in public policy that got all sorts of undergraduate degrees, from political science, which is a pretty common alternative and is offered at most schools, to even engineering or English. People from all of those backgrounds go into public policy careers. One of my colleagues was a visual arts major in undergrad, and then later he went back to law school for environmental law and is one of our climate advisors for the governor. So there are lots of different career paths that can happen. All right, so now I'm going to get into making the policymaking process, and project management. So a little bit more about my team. The governor's policy team helps to shape policy initiatives and goals for the governor, and we work closely with cabinet agencies. There are 10 people total on my team, with 8 advisors and a policy director who is senior staff to the governor, and then myself. My role as a special assistant is to do everything from some administrative work like scheduling to doing research and writing briefs to the governor, writing briefs to other staff about policy ideas that we're thinking about. So it's a really great role as a first job out of college, because I get to learn from so many experts and kind of see what I might be interested in the future. So some of the things that we do on the policy team, the biggest thing is probably executive orders. You've probably heard that word thrown around before. An example of this would be last year, the governor signed an executive order for paid parental leave for all agency state employees. So this affects thousands of people in the state and secures parental leave, so that if they or their spouse has a child or adopts a child, they can get 4 to 8 weeks of paid leave. So we're really proud of that one. There's also a climate change executive order, which is ongoing. It has the goal of reducing carbon emissions in the state by 40% by 2025 and 70% by 2030. We also have the goal of putting 80,000 zero emissions vehicles, which is a fancy way of saying electric vehicles, on the road in North Carolina. So those are some executive order or EO examples. We also help to develop state budgets. The North Carolina legislature writes a budget to be signed by the governor, but the governor's office presents a budget as well for things that we would like to see for the next years. So we work with cabinet agencies to figure out, what programs need more funding, where things can be shifted, and things like that. And then another thing we do is we advocate to the federal government. So you probably and hopefully know that there are several levels to government. So there's the federal level, there's the state level, and then there's the local level. And each level has different abilities and what's in our jurisdiction. So an example of this would be protecting endangered red wolves. The Endangered Species Act and generally protecting endangered species is a federal government thing. But here in North Carolina, we have the red wolf, which is just found in North Carolina. They're critically endangered. There are literally only a dozen left in the wild right now. And so we would really like to see more funding put towards saving the red wolves. So last year, Governor Cooper wrote a letter to President Trump asking for more funding and more attention being paid to saving the red wolf. So our team was kind of the team around researching and drafting that letter to go to the president. Okay, so you just heard about a lot of different things that we do, and a lot of times we're doing them all at once. So now I'm going to get into a little bit of project management. No matter what field you're in, you have to do project management, and you have to stay organized to achieve your goals. So typically, a project management process looks a little something like this. First, you're defining what type of project you would like to do. Then you initiate that process. Who needs to be involved? Who are the stakeholders? What will it look like? And as it starts to take shape, and then you and whoever else needs to be involved will plan. You figure out a timeline, what your outcome would like to be, if there are any sort of intermittent goals through in there. And then after that, you have to execute the project itself to then hopefully close it out. And I will say, in the policy making process, you really don't get to close out a project that often, because what we're doing is ongoing. People are affected by our policies, and so they may have responses to it, and it's really an always changing process. So that gets me to our next slide, and I really like this graphic. I actually remembered seeing this from when I took AP Government in high school, and was able to find it again online, which is really exciting. As an aside, if you're interested in this world, I highly recommend taking AP Government and Politics. I thought it was a great class and is pretty realistic to what this world looks like. So that's just kind of a plug for that class. So if you look here, you can really see what I mean by our projects are never really closed out. So in my world, we kind of exist in that blue space in the middle with legislators, executives, courts, and the bureaucracy in general. But before that can even happen, people have problems and interests and concerns, and then advocacy groups may take those problems to us and set the agenda. So there's a whole process that kind of goes on before it even reaches us. And then we'll work with those stakeholders, come up with solutions, put our policy out there, but then it impacts people. And so the cycle starts all over again. So it's really always changing, which is a really exciting challenge. So finally, I'm going to get into careers in public policy, starting off with getting the job. Okay, so this slide is a picture of me and with much shorter hair. And this is from graduation at UNC. I decided that I had to get graduation pics in the library on campus because that's honestly where I spent most of my time in college. This is me doing some map making stuff. So that kind of goes to show you have to work hard. So the very first thing, in my opinion, the most important things of the 4 things I'm about to talk about for getting a job is internships and network building. You'll hear that all the time when you're in college, constantly from people, and it will be beaten to the ground, but it's important. And I'll tell you why with a real life example of how I got to where I am. So when I was a junior at Chapel Hill, I applied to this program at the a state of North Carolina internship program, which anyone in the state can apply to. I highly recommend it. And they kind of pair you with different state agencies for internships within the state. You get paid. It's awesome. So I was paired with an internship with the Department of Environmental Quality doing environmental justice work, which was awesome. It's what I was really passionate about in college. So it was a great internship. So I did the internship. I really made sure to be outspoken and go above and beyond my internship duties. And because of this, I was noticed by higher ups within the agency. So at the close of my summer internship, they managed to scrounge together enough money in the budget to create a new temporary position for me for the school year. If you know anything about local government, you know that it's really hard to find extra money laying around. So this was a pretty big deal. And during my senior year of college, I would commute from Chapel Hill to downtown Raleigh 3 days a week while being a full-time student, working 30 hours a week with DEQ on environmental justice issues for the rest of the year. And I applied to a bunch of jobs. I wasn't really getting anywhere by the time of graduation, feeling kind of bummed out because I felt like I'd really worked hard and I wasn't seeing many results in the application process. And then this opportunity within the governor's office came along, and some of those higher up mentors at DEQ recommended that I apply. So I was like, okay, I'll put my application into the ring. And it was a really strenuous interview process. There were, I think, a few rounds of interviews. I had to do a writing test. But I think what really put me over the edge was having those recommendations from a trusted source, like a state agency that works under the governor, and those people who are respected in our field could really vouch for me and the hard work that I had done. And I think that helped me set me apart. And without that internship, I don't think I would have been able to get the job that I have at the governor's office. And that all started off with me just applying to something online that I found. So that just goes to show that it's really important to intern and then also build networks within those internships. So the other 3 things I'll touch on briefly. First or second, I guess, is extracurriculars. You know, you do extracurriculars in middle and high school, but you also do them in college. I had lots of friends involved in all sorts of things, from dance troops to a cappella groups. I coached little kids soccer for a couple of years in college. I was also a part of Environmental Honor Society that I really loved. And I think it's really important to do these things, not only for your own mental health, but because it also helps you build skill sets that you will use in the workforce. So I wouldn't say that you should join a club just because you think it will boost your resume. Join something that you're really interested in. There are hundreds of clubs in college to join. There are so many opportunities to find your niche, to find your passion. And then from there, work your way up, do executive positions if you can, and then you get to experience managing people, managing budgets, and things like that that can really prepare you for the workforce and the real world. Third is strong coursework. Obviously, you know, you should work hard in your classes, but take classes that you're interested in and that you think have to do with the career you would want. So for example, whenever I saw a class with the title climate change in it, I immediately looked to see if I could take it. I took advantage of every class I could find like that. Also within my policy classes that were more general, if there was an open prompt to a research paper where I could choose a topic I wanted, I always made sure I chose a topic relevant to the career I wanted to go into. So that would be my suggestion when thinking about your coursework. And then finally, demonstrated passion for the subject. I'm sure you hear this from your teachers all the time too, because I know that I heard this from teachers. Teachers don't get into teaching because of the money or because they don't want to do it. They do it because they want to work with kids. And policymakers are really similar in that. We don't do it for the money. We're doing it because we want to make a difference in people's lives and serve the public. So it's something that you have to be passionate about, and that will also shine through in the interview process. All right, so now I'm going to touch on the world of public policy that's beyond just what I do in government. So I would break down the public policy sector into 4 big areas within the public and private sectors. I've already talked about government a bit, so I'm not going to touch on that. But next we have nonprofits and advocacy work. These groups are great. They're very issue-based, so if you are really, really passionate about one particular issue, you can dedicate all of your time to that issue in a nonprofit agency. They're also really grassroots. You know, they're the people with boots on the ground, talking to people, real people every single day in a way that sometimes government agencies can't do. They can also advocate across all 3 branches of government. So nonprofits will be stakeholders in processes with us and the executive branch and regulatory agencies. They'll also lobby in legislatures, and they will also advocate through lawsuits in the court system, which can go all the way up to the Supreme Court. So there are a lot of ways that nonprofits can touch public policy. Next, we have academia. And academics are really the leading experts on the issue. It's very data and research driven. You're publishing papers all the times, but they're the people that we really look to for advice about a lot of policy issues. Example number 1 is the pandemic. Once again, you know, we're very fortunate that North Carolina has some of the best public health schools in the country. And when the pandemic happened and has continued to happen, you know, these experts at Duke and Carolina have prepared models and studies that can help inform our decisions and the governor's decisions and Secretary Mandy Cohen's decisions on how we're moving forward with the pandemic. And then finally, we have the private sector. This is usually known as consulting. A lot of my peers went into consulting after graduation. It's pretty different from all of these other groups. It's very fast-paced and short-term. So you're contracted out by a government agency typically to work on a particular problem. That's your focus. You're figuring out what the problem is, giving recommendations to solve it, and then you move on to your next thing for your next contract. And this can be really exciting. It's very fast-paced. It pays usually a lot better than the public sector does. But I would say a drawback to that is that you don't really get to see your policy recommendations afterwards. Like, you give them to a government group. That doesn't necessarily mean the government group will take those recommendations. So in that way, the government's much more long-term thinking, and the private sector is short-term. And whichever you do, I think really is dependent on your personality type, honestly, and what you're interested in doing. So finally, I really just want to iterate that whatever issue you may care about right now, there are tons of ways to be involved in public policy. There are the traditional ways with the 3 branches of government and the legislature, courts, and regulatory bodies, but there are also a ton of other ways. So just think about an issue you really care about. There's the media that can really influence that issue. There are advocacy groups that work just on that issue. There are think tanks. There's academic research around it, and there's the private sector. And last but not least, there's just good old-fashioned public participation. Even if you decide that you want to pursue a career in something else that isn't public policy, you can be a part of the public policy process. You can go to your town council meetings or public hearings in your area and have your voice heard to these government bodies. You know, in America, we have the right to demonstrate. Once you're 18, you can register to vote, and please, please vote. And those are all great ways that really have an impact in the political and policy process that we have, and can influence those decisions. So I encourage you, even if you don't think this is the career for you, but you have an interest in it, to figure out how you can get involved in public policy. And with that, that's the conclusion of my presentation, but I am happy to take questions.
Wow, Ms. Recktenwald, thank you so much for all these wonderful examples. And the wonderful thing is, you're not really a lot older than some of our seniors that might be watching this. So I love that you used the example of the AP Government and Politics class. We actually just had an AP rep come to one of our sessions last week, and she's coming back in a few more weeks. But what's some other high school classes that would be beneficial besides the core classes that students might look at?
Sure, that's a great question. I think that AP Human Geography was a really great class too. It's something that is part of the reason why I wanted to major in geography, but it also looks at how people relate to each other, which is really involved in the policy process too. So I think that's another great class. Thinking of other classes, I know I didn't take economics, but I know that that was an option too. I kind of wish I did, so I got that AP credit. I would also say statistics. I took AP statistics in high school and did not take it very seriously and didn't do well enough on my AP exam to get that credit for college. And it's something I ended up needing in my major. So I would encourage any sort of statistics type classes too, and to pay attention to them. But also, just back to the core classes, English is really important, writing, any sort of social studies are great. I loved AP US History. It's one of my favorite classes. Policy making has to be influenced by history too, right? Like, we have to learn from our mistakes, so that's important too. So any of those sort of social sciencey type classes are great as well.
Those are excellent examples. And in all these series that we're doing about careers, we touch upon all these writing and communication skills, building relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So what advice would you give to our students about formal and informal writing styles? Because one of the things I know, even in the classes I teach, is sometimes they want to do the very informal writings for formal type situations. So what advice would you give to them about making sure that they're meeting those essay requirements, even for college applications, scholarships, and all these different things to help them stand apart?
Sure, I think that's a great question. With college applications and scholarships, those essays can be quite personal. So I think it is helpful for you to incorporate your personal experiences to why you might care about a particular issue. So if you're writing an essay about why a particular topic matters, if you can bring it back to yourself a little bit in examples, I think that's always pretty helpful. But in general, in policy writing, a lot of what you're doing is being pretty argumentative. You have to lay out the groundwork. It's very much like, here's the data, here's the formal, like here are the facts basically that you're presenting. And then you have to make the convincing argument to why this change, this policy solution will fix this problem. So you need to be a strong writer, and that you can both take those big ideas and concepts and then connect them to how to solve a problem. So that's something that's very specific with policy writing, that you can fine tune and get better at. I think I'm not sure. I was right before Common Core really started, so I'm not really sure what it looks like now. But I remember in English class in high school that I took was very much focused on understanding, like from an essay, being able to make arguments about it. So I would really pay attention to writing classes like that as well, particularly for policy. But I think it is helpful in your applications for scholarships and colleges to bring a little bit of personal in there too, without being informal or too casual.
Thank you for those excellent examples. Another thought that I had, in any job, we have our formal training that lends itself to what we will do in the job. But then we also have the on-the-job training once we get there. What types of surprises did you have in moving from your college realm to the workplace realm? What real world experiences have you had to adjust to in this situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that actually I work with some capstone students from UNC Chapel Hill who are in public policy. And so I'm still in contact with the dean over there sometimes. And one of the things I told her that I really wish our program did more was understanding how time sensitive the real world is. We would get a whole semester to develop a policy proposal or a research project on a particular topic, and we had a lot of time to write and fine tune it. But the reality is, in the real world, a lot of what in my job we're doing is putting out fires, right? Like, no one saw the pandemic coming. So you have to be really fast, and you have to be really good really fast. So some examples are some executive orders that kind of were a little bit more reactionary to what was going on in the world at the time. For example, in May, after the death of George Floyd, the governor wanted to assemble a task force on criminal and racial equity. And so we got to work right away. We had to figure out exactly what this task force would look like, who would be a part of it, et cetera. We have to, in the executive order, write these fancy things called whereas clauses that basically give the arguments and the data for why this is needed. And so just overnight, it was like, Bailey, go find, all of this information and be able to write it out in this formal way. So sometimes you don't get a ton of a heads up on things because that's how the real world works. So just being able to work very quickly and on your feet is something that surprised me. I guess I kind of knew it would come, but I didn't think that college had prepared me for as well as I had hoped.
Well, I think that goes back to those good problem solving skills and having that, that is, we're on deadlines in the work world that are quicker than our college or even high school classes. So we have to be able to have those great time management skills and research skills, like you said. Where do you get good data? And we have to make those judgments. So thinking about that, those are technical kind of skills too, but what kind of soft skills versus hard skills do you think are very needful for this particular kind of job in policy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think willingness to not only communicate and be personable, but also to listen to others is incredibly important. Like I said, a lot of policy is making compromises. You're working with a ton of stakeholders and a ton of groups at once who have different views. So you have to be able to really listen and reflect, and be able to take what people say to make something out of it, and that's not a skill that's really taught. I think that's a softer skill, where you just have to become a good listener would probably be my top soft skill.
Yes, that's very important. And sometimes having even those wait times like we have in teachers have to learn to give students opportunities to share information. And I think that's even a good point, like you said, in listening, giving people time to formulate what they're going to say, because some people are quicker thinkers and
Mhm.
quick answers, and then others take a little bit more time. So having those observational skills and knowing when to do that. Thinking about if you were to go for a job, interview skills, or even for college scholarships, or if you go to a college, what types of points would you give to our students about having good interview skills?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's something that I didn't feel like I was prepared for in high school. I think I probably missed out on a few scholarships because of lack of interview preparedness. So I would say really to prepare and Google questions ahead of time that are really common, that might be hard for you to answer, so that you have an answer prepared. For example, in my opinion, one of the hardest interview questions is what's a failure that you've had, because you don't want your failure to be so big that they're like, oh my gosh, I would never hire that person. But you also don't want to say, I've never failed at anything, because that's not true. Everyone's failed at something. So that's a question that I would really think long and hard about to figure out where that sweet spot is. But overall, just you can just literally Google most frequently asked interview questions and write them down and have an answer prepared for every single one of them before you get in the meeting, so that you're not just kind of stuck in silence, or you have to say, well, give me a minute to think about that, and you don't have something prepared. So that's something that really helped me a lot once I began doing that when I was looking for internships and jobs later on, that I wish I had done earlier.
That's a wonderful example. And I think the premise about what have we failed at is
Mm,
how did we overcome that, and how did
exactly.
we make steps to have that growth mindset that, well, I'm not here yet because I didn't succeed. So, how am I going to go forth and make that happen? Yesterday, we had Noel Talley and Maddie Lazare Chatterton on, and they were talking about the governor's page program. Do you think this
Mhm.
might be a good venue for students to apply for, to work
Yeah.
and to get used to how some of the political processes work?
Absolutely. The Governor's Page program is fantastic. I'm good friends with the person, Gianna, who runs the program. She's excellent. I think it's a really great way to see what opportunities are out there, specifically in state government. So right now it's being done virtually, and I think they're trying to do this like this still as well. But when it was in person, you would go to different state agencies, you would hear people talk to you about what their jobs are and what it entails, and you find out about jobs that you wouldn't even know exist, that I probably don't even know exist. So state government in general is huge. We're the biggest employers for the state, so it's I think a really awesome opportunity that's worth applying for and trying to do if you have a time. I didn't know about it when I was in high school, but I definitely wish I did. I would recommend it for sure.
Thank you. That's a great recommendation. What about rural students who may not have as much
Mhm.
opportunity to get out and try some of these other things? Do you have any suggestions that they might look at, places to do some volunteer opportunities and learn some different policy and procedures?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. You know, unfortunately, like with the PAGE program, you have to be able to get to Raleigh, and that can be a big barrier to people. But state government isn't the only thing. There's local government too. So every single town has a town council and a mayor. You have county commissioners. You have your local public health department. So there are a lot of really important folks that work on the local level to make sure that the day-to-day workings of a town or city are operating. And those are great places to look for as well, and to look into right in your hometown. So I would suggest maybe contacting your town council or something like that to see what opportunities there might be there. Or even if you can shadow for someone, not necessarily a volunteering or intern thing, but just follow them around for a few days. Most people love to be shadowed at some point and to show young people the ropes. So government in general, there are policy makers literally everywhere and every place that you are. So it's not something that's just reserved for Capitol Hill or the White House or even in Raleigh. There are people that are making these tough choices and decisions everywhere you are every day. So learn who those people are in your community and reach out to them.
Those are excellent examples, especially because you can start building those networks and start making those connections, because this is something I talk about all the time. We never know what those meetings are, just casually meeting someone or meeting someone that knows someone will bring about in our future for our educational opportunities or even our career opportunities. So those are such great suggestions. Well, I don't have any more questions, but I thank you for this wonderful presentation that you pulled together, because you gave our students such good information and ways that they can do career explorations and other things. So is there anything else you want to add before we sign off?
You know, I would just reiterate that you can be involved in this field even if you don't make a career out of it. So, you know, don't be afraid if there's something that has been striking you lately personally that you really care about, even before you're 18 and you can vote. There are lots of ways that you can be involved in that, and I would encourage everyone to do that. But thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be on, and to be with this speaker series. It's just a really wonderful thing, and one of the other ways that's a great example of something that a student can do to learn more about what's out there. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Miss Recktenwald, and we just wish you well there in Raleigh, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise.
Thank you.